Yeah, well, it's just a little bit after 7 here. I know it's 5 o'clock your time, but just a little bit after 7. So I'll start to do a little introduction to you all, and then I'll turn it over to you. So as I mentioned, this is one of our series of webinars on climate change. We try to do one every season of the year, and we are planning on doing one again in the fall. We're working on putting together a climate solutions event. So something a little bit lighter, just like yours is, just a little bit lighter. So ways to deal with climate change, some solutions for it. So we're working on that one. So stay tuned, everyone. I want to thank everyone for attending this evening. This is our continuing series on climate change. And this evening's topic is all about living with heart in climate change, presented by Ecology. And I'll explain that a little bit more in a moment here. So I'm Lauren Bohr, and I am the Education Coordinator for Public and Youth Programs here at Mohonk Preserve. And tonight, our presenters are Ecology, also known as Dr. Mary Clare, and science writer Gary Ferguson. So before I do a complete introduction background on the two of you, I just want to remind everyone that we are recording this, and it will be made available on our website. And I'll send out the link to everyone who has been registered for this as well. So this is archived and can be viewed again at any time. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can use the chat box. I'm pointing like you all can see the chat box, but you can use the chat box that's there. We will have time for question and answers at the end of the presentation. And again, you can type your questions into the chat, or if you're not as comfortable typing and you'd like to ask it, you'll see that there's a speak with a little hand raised icon. If you click on that, it will activate your camera, and you'll be able to ask the question directly, your camera and your microphone. So you can ask them directly your question. And so with that all said, we are ready to introduce our presenters. So I have the whole thing I get to read about here. All right, so our presenters are Gary Ferguson, best-selling science writer and a keynote speaker, and he began his career chronicling the tracks humans leave in nature. Today, though, the author publishes weekly calls ever evocative, says he's working to portray the tracks nature leaves in us. Ferguson's most recent book, Full Ecology, where you get your name from, Repairing Our Relationship with the Natural World, is co-authored with his wife, Dr. Mary Clare, and The 8 Master Lessons of Nature is published by Penguin Random House. A few years ago, in 2019, it served as the groundwork for Full Ecology, and has gained substantial acclaim throughout the U.S. and across the world. And now Dr. Mary Clare is from all over the place. You've managed to live in many different places: Oregon, Texas, California, Georgia, Nebraska, and now in Montana, where the two of you currently are. And you bring your lifelong passion for the natural world together with a 30-year career as a social and cultural psychologist. So most recently, she has co-authored with Gary Ferguson the book Full Ecology, Repairing Our Relationship with the Natural World. And yeah, there it is. A fellow in the American Psychological Association with over 100 scholarly articles and 3 books, Mary has worked in collaboration with tribal leaders, migrant farm workers, National Park Service leadership, teachers and school administrators, and thousands of graduate students preparing to be community leaders. So Mary opens doorways for considering how the natural world around and inside us can be tapped as a guiding force for more contented and fruitful lives. Her spirited insights and techniques help people revive their natural capacities for sustaining creative relationships and drawing on deep resilience in troubling times. So this is just a really great pairing of science and writing, communication, and of course, psychology. What is going on with all these feelings that we have? There's a lot in the news lately, a lot of things in the news lately, but including topics on climate change. We were just discussing prior to the start of things what has been happening in Yellowstone, close by where they are, and how you were just nearby in the Yellowstone ecosystem. You can kind of saw some of the effects of the flooding that has been taking place there. So with all of that said, I'd love to turn things over to our presenters. So here is Dr. Mary Clare and Gary Ferguson.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you so much for that, Lauren. It's good to be here with all of you, even though we can't see you. We know you're there, and it's good to be here with you. I feel after Lauren's introduction, I feel like it's important. I want us to talk a little bit. We were just in Yellowstone country. We live in Yellowstone country. The ecosystem is bigger than the park itself. And the places that were most severely affected by the flood are the gateway communities in the Yellowstone River Basin. Would that be an accurate description?
Right.
Yeah.
So we're talking Gardner, Montana on the north entrance, and Red Lodge, Montana, especially on the northeast entrance, and Livingston a little to the north of the park by about 45 miles. Just phenomenal flooding, eating out entire roads to the point that the north entrance will probably never be on the same road that it has been for so long. So this just amazed climate ecologists as well as, of course, the folks who are making their living in those communities.
Yeah, the understanding that we've come to, well, for one thing, climate change demands that everything go into improvisation. And so this topic, how do we keep heart in this time when we really can't call what's going to happen? The events in Yellowstone have been quite stunning to many people, especially people who are paying close attention to what's happening with the climate. And Yellowstone, it was perfect stormy in a lot of ways. People who are hydrologists have described to us, and weather people, that we got so much additional snow in June that it was melt ready when we got, what was it, 400%?
400% of the usual June total of precipitation in 3 days on top of a big late season snow.
And all the snow was ready to melt. So that pushed water down so fast and larger than even 1,000-year flood projections by double. So just blew out the minds of scientists who follow this sort of thing.
And of course, this is not a topic that's unfamiliar to a lot of people who are living in the East, the Northeast and the Southeast. Rain and excessive rain and flooding, it tends to be something that you all deal with there more than we do out in the West, where the theme is typically drought and fire and so forth. But it's worth thinking about before we kind of further introduce ourselves, that for every degree Celsius the temperature goes up, and it's going up and has in the last 30 years, the atmosphere can hold, if you will, 7% more moisture. So there's just a lot more water in the sky than there has been. And so with winds and storm tracking and ocean current shifts, there are many parts of the world where it's not drought and wildfire, but rather flooding. And this is going to continue for some time. But again, we're here to talk about how does one maintain heart in the face of those realities.
And one of the things that we've seen that is not surprising to us because of the research and observations of our own, we've seen the social ecologies around these crises. There's a researcher and practitioner named Bessel van der Kolk, who some of you may have heard of, who has looked closely at what happens to communities after a big trauma, a fire, a flood, a hurricane, a tornadoes, whatever might happen in that way. And what happens before anybody else shows up, and by that I mean before the federal aid or any other kind of outside aid, is that the people the people who are able-bodied back up the emergency service people, and they get real creative. They set up street signs that have been knocked down. They dig in rubble to find people who might be injured. They go and find water anywhere to start distributing it to other people. Then they get to food. Then they get to blankets. And people, when people do that, van der Kolk sees the long-term impact of the trauma on the people who helped and on the people who were helped, the people who were trapped, is that the trauma is less likely to seize in as deeply. And so we know that one of the ways of keeping heart is really quite natural to us. And Gary, you talk about evolutionary biology and what we've learned from that. Is that what it is?
Yeah, and maybe I'll just take this moment, if I could, to rewind to sort of the genesis of full ecology. When Mary and I first met back in 2013, I had been working for some time writing about and helping in various ways the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone. And when Mary asked me in that first meeting what I'd been working on, I was very excited, I remember, to tell her about some of the science that's showing up as far as how cooperative a wolf pack is, how they care for children together, how they have a loose democracy that allows for leadership, but also a lot of individual choice within the group, how they hunt cooperatively. And it was clear to scientists, certainly by the year 2000, who were tracking the wolves, which were introduced in 1995, that this cooperation is, and this bonding that comes through cooperation, including play. Wolves are incredibly playful, to the point where they often in June go up to the head of snowfields and get on their backs and slide down with their tongues lolling, and then run up to the top and do it again, the whole pack enjoying it. So
and they play frisbee, right?
They tear pieces
carcass.
Sometimes, especially younger wolves will tear pieces of carcass from an elk that they may have taken and throw it up in the air and catch it, or one will throw it and the other will catch it. It's like, oh, that's where my dog's loving of frisbee comes from. And, it wasn't, I remember Mary and I talking, it wasn't just the wolves showing this really brilliant inclination to get along with one another, and that making them strong. But this was also happening with elephants and orcas and lemurs and dolphins and lions. So what I was so excited about when we first met was this notion of cooperation and interdependence that was allowing a lot of mammals besides humans to be as successful as they have been, not just to survive, but to thrive. It all depends on that kind of interrelatedness.
And so then I started sharing with Gary that we have really come to understand that human connection in community is vital to our well-being. And here are 3 ways that it shows up. One is that people who are recovering from substance addictions do way, way, way better in community than isolated. One of the things that is true about that is that most people have to leave old community. But if they just go into isolation, they don't do as well. They've got to have new community. This is why the anonymous programs can be so powerful, but it doesn't have to be that. But community really helps people bust that addiction habit. Then the other thing is that people who have experienced really profound trauma in the wake of that trauma, which is the rest of their lives, it's not going to go away. They all do way better when they're in diverse community, when they're in community, not just with people who have been through it too, but with many, many people. And here's the third example. People who remain in community into older life and stay connected with other people are way less likely to get dementia.
We really are, when Mary mentioned evolutionary biology earlier, we really are among the most cooperative species on planet Earth. But the good news we come to share with you tonight is that quality, along with a number of other qualities that exist out in the natural world, which we'll talk about, from diversity to efficiency in what we do, to the passing of wisdom from elders, the things that are going on out in the natural world that I was very familiar with, especially in writing the 8 Master Lessons of Nature, in fact, all are expressed uniquely in humans as well. And why this is so exciting, and hopefully it will be exciting to you, is that it means you are nature, you are the natural world, and full ecology is about reclaiming your human nature. Mm-hmm. We find it so comforting to think that not just us, but the whole world is wired to thrive. And if we as humans choose to look to the inner nature in us and the nature around us, for how we should take action in the face of something like climate change, then it will do much to give us the heart and the long-term commitment that we need to address this issue, because it's going to be with us for a very long time.
Yes, and what Gary says about the evolutionary biologist showing us that the reason that all of us are here right now looking into this technology and spending this time with each other, the reason that the people you ran into today and you interacted with each other is because we are essentially cooperative and kind. You would not know that from the headlines necessarily, but that's what has made it so that we have made it this far. And we overlook that. Part of the reason that we overlook that is because it's associated with feminine. And we do live in a quite masculinized culture here in the United States. And by that, I mean a culture that's more about agency rather than care. We take care for granted, and we look to agency, we look to productivity, we look to, that kind of stuff. Competition.
You may have heard the phrase survival of the fittest, often attributed to Darwin. But the thing to realize about that phrase is Darwin meant it in fitness in the way that it refers to who is most able to respond and adjust to the inevitable changes and disruptions going on in their environment. That's his definition of fitness, and other evolutionary biologists as well, to the point that some of them now are saying, rather than survival of the fittest, we're really talking about survival of the friendliest.
And so that then takes us back to what we've been doing with full ecology. And that is to realize that any of us, any of you, the two of us, we can care as much as we want to about the natural world. We can really want to be a part of the solution. And that really requires that in addition to attending to the natural world that we've learned kind of is outside of us, we must pay attention. We must tend. And the ecologies, our social ecologies, the ones that are between us and the ones that are within us. And then that's something for you to just like take and consider in the days after this. What is a social ecology? What does that look like? And how do those stay healthy? How do we stay healthy in interaction with our families, with our coworkers, with our friends and family, extended family? How does that look? And what does the natural world have to tell us about how to do that?
And we'd like to talk with you about several of the qualities that exist both outside of us in nature and within us, and is essential to everything on the planet. We've already started down the road toward cooperation and interrelatedness, and that's a primary thing to really get, to the extent that the fact of the matter is you don't even end at the edge of your skin. I mean, scientifically and biologically, there are lots of exchanges going on. For instance, if you go out and walk under a tree, that tree will not just be giving off oxygen to you and you giving off carbon dioxide to it. It will also give off a group of chemicals called phytoncides, which with every breath you take strengthens your immune system and fortifies your vital organs, your heart, your liver, your kidneys. The daylight is what sets your melatonin levels, which not only allow you to sleep, but protect you to some degree, some significant degree, it looks like, against cancers. There are more microbes living in you than human cells, microbe cells than human cells. Many of those came to live with you after you were here, and they live to some degree, a large degree, in your gut, and they help basically break down the nutrients you need to feed your brain, feed your muscles. There are more microbes on your skin that keep dangerous pathogens from getting inside of you. And so there's this lovely web of life that you participate in, even if you're not aware of it most days.
Right. And so when we talk about, you're going to get the light?
We have a storm cloud coming over, so we're going to turn on a light. it was nice and sunny just 5 minutes ago, but as is true in Montana, often that can change. And
there you go. There's a little light on you. And
our fingers are crossed for rain.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're talking about that interconnectedness and how fundamentally real it is. This isn't just a philosophical take, either from the social science perspective or the natural biological science perspective. This is how life works. Mm-hmm. And the more science looks into it, and this is such an exciting time because of this, the more science looks into it, the more they realize that there are webs of connection, much like the mycelium networks underneath the trees that allow the trees to sort of talk to each other and send nutrients and send warnings about insect invasions to each other, even across species. So these days, everywhere we look, there is much evidence of these wonderful webs of connection.
Yeah, and so this is the way that we survive anyway. This is the invitation I'd like to make right now, and that is for you to use your own empirical investigation, for you to just look and see that thing that Gary mentioned. Check and see, do you end where your skin ends? Gary told you a lot of things about how interdependent we are physically and how, there is this interaction going on all the time between these bodies and the natural world. But that's another question for you to investigate. Do you end where your skin ends? How are you affected by the people who are around you, and how do you affect them? How are you and this is, getting into the social science of it and really the psychology of it, suppose we could talk even spirituality of it. How are you in interaction with your very own self? So Gary speaks often about how the superpowers of the natural world are our superpowers too. So those include, like he said, and like I'll articulate a little more, you can find them on our website, which is fullecology.com. We call them the 8 instructions. Connection, I won't be able to do all of them. Everything's interconnected. Diversity. The best predictor of resilience in any ecosystem is how diverse it is. And we know that, for example, if you're going to be on trial and you have a jury, you want that jury to be diverse, because juries that are culturally diverse are more likely to see more angles on the issue and come to a just decision. Yeah. So, and the other thing that from my disciplines, we know that research that is done by very diverse research teams gets cited more than research that's done by very homogeneous research teams. And that's the same thing. It's just bringing different perspectives to bear makes it so that we see much better than if we're just bringing people who think and think the same way.
Yeah. So
those are two, diversity.
At the same time, we're benefiting from the kinds of diversity that Mary just talked about. You've got the fact all around us that ecosystems that are disrupted by floods, by wildfire, tend to come back fastest and in the most robust fashion. The ones that are most diverse have a distinct edge. And that's why biologists say that diversity is such a good predictor for resiliency. It helps us withstand the challenges we face. I think maybe we might be wise to go back one step to, again, that connected position. And you've probably, if you've familiarized yourself with the thinking of indigenous people or even cultures from long ago, there is this theme frequently of how unified and how connected things are, both from a religious standpoint as well as just a practical way that people live. And if that's true, and if what we're saying is true about connection, how in the world did we lose that sensibility? And it's an important question to ask, because one of the challenges we think that faces us in the midst of climate change isn't being clever enough to come up with technology that will be sustainable. We're actually very good at that, and there's lots of wonderful technology out there and being developed all the time. But will we be able to implement that diversity. That takes a kind of storytelling system, a cultural foundation. It takes heart.
It does.
Yeah, it really does. And so this understanding the primacy of our connectedness is going to be really important if we're going to live out of that truth and out of a set of stories that reflect that truth.
And so that's where the empirical investigation that I mentioned earlier, are we connected? You know, there are people who are in positions of great power who tend to, some of them appear to forget that they're connected with everybody and everything. And the fact is that anybody with a lot of power and privilege doesn't get from one place to another on highway systems that haven't been prepared and maintained by other people. They don't generate any kind of paperwork without a lot of help with people who make the paper, people who make the computers, and people who do that work for them. You know, so all of us, you know, we don't live at all if we don't eat. And so that's an interdependence. We're all connected with everything. So you all probably don't need a lot of convincing, but it is fascinating that that's something that's downplayed, especially in the dominant culture in the United States.
We have created what is more often trending toward a culture that might be described as a me first culture, a subject object culture, us versus them, a zero sum gain culture where I don't want you to have a certain resource or benefit because if you have it, I won't. And there's a reason why that's so common for us in much of the Western world. We can go back a couple thousand years, but let's just go back 500 years to the beginning of what we know as modern science, the days of Descartes and Francis Bacon and Newton. There was, in service of this new science, the development of subject-object thinking and scientific method. And scientific method, if you're going to study a bird, you would isolate that bird, disconnect it from the tree it lives in, from the insects it eats, from the soil that grew the tree, from the weather patterns that it has to live through.
The other birds.
The
predators.
You would hold it as an isolated individual. And that's a very artificial way to look at the world. The world is in no way that way, but it does allow us to determine some limited truth about objects. And we learned a lot. And a lot of what we learned became the tools of technology. But we forgot that it was just a tool, this subject-object thinking, and not the whole truth. And so without a healthier story underlying those tools, we end up really believing that we're disconnected and separate from each other. We act in ways that allow us to, as subject, objectify other people. People of different skin color, to objectify women. There's an in-group and an out-group that happens, and it was fostered by the economics of that time, which we still live with today, and to the point where really every institution you can think of, from healthcare to education to the way corporate entities often work, it's still with us, that kind of notion, this big breakthrough idea of subject-object thinking.
Of separation. We call it separation thinking. So, you know, the billboards you see, the advertisements you see nonstop on social media and so on and so forth, they are set up that we are the they. We are the they. We are the consumers that are to be convinced to purchase the whatever we purchase, the goods and services that we purchase, so that we, and it even gets real psychological, so that you'll be more of a human being if you have a Maserati or something like that, you know. So we're really hooked into that. Shall I tell the other reason we are?
Yes, right. There's another big reason from the social science.
Yeah, and all of these, I'm going to hold this up from time to time because I really would love for you all to check it out, in part because we really want people to read this. We like our book. We want you to read it, but it's good. and it is helpful for having heart in full ecology.
We think it does have heart, and we hope you find so too.
And so we we can include it in the book, the part from psychology, from developmental psychology in particular. So Gary's talking about this subject-object orientation. If you have a culture like we do that's set up on separation thinking, then you have a me and you have a they. And it's pretty scary. But there's another reason that we have that kind of inclination in the first place. It is an inclination. It's not supported by all cultures, so it doesn't turn out the way it does in our culture. And each of you has this option to choose seeing yourself as in relationship rather than as separate. That's pretty dang scary. But this is where it comes from. All of you were born, and that means that that all of you were born. I don't think that's news to you. And that means that at some point, you've seen this in the infants in your life. At one point, the infants, until about 4 months, you can do peekaboo, you can do all sorts of cute adult tricks. And when you cover your face with that bandana, they're just like, you don't exist anymore. Or when you hide the rattle underneath the high chair tray, it doesn't exist anymore. They don't even notice. And that's because at that point in their cognitive development, babies are born really being one with everything. And that's something that we can look at and go, oh my, I want some of that. And that's great. Of course we do, but they can't ever be conscious of that. So we have to go through this wild experience of being individuals. So around 6-8 months, you can be playing with that baby, same old trick, trying to get them to respond. And you take the rattle, you shake it, and then you hide it under the tray. And for the first time, that baby goes, huh, I think that still exists. And they look over the tray to see if they can see it. That is the very first sprout of ego. If the baby knew what she was doing, she'd be going, don't want that. But not really, because you do. You need to go through it. But the experience is a me separate from something else. And it's just a matter of time before babies really develop what we call separation anxiety, because they know their parents still exist when they go away. So we are cognitively designed to have this experience of being separate in these bodies. And we don't have the opportunity to ask that question unless we go through at least 12 or 14 years of that. Many, many human beings never get past that. Never get past the experience of self-separate from others. But you have to go through the different iterations of feeling yourself as self-separate from in order to have a chance to go, wait a minute, is that really all that's going on here? And that's what Gary and I are asking when we ask that question, do you end here at your skin? Do you really? Or are you, in part, the relationships that you're in? Are you the relationships, in addition, that you have with the natural world? Check that out. Because that's where you are. You wouldn't be attending this webinar if you weren't kind of suspicious that there's way more going on here than just this story of me, than just this experience of ego in a wild and woolly world separate from everybody else who has to be vigilant and on the lookout all the time. And you can probably begin already to see that it is with that really opening to the fact that you are in relationship. Two things happen. You get it that you belong, you've always belonged. And you get it that it's time to get right-sized, to be your right size, and to invite other people to our right size as human beings. We're very cooperative with each other in our good moments. And in right size, we don't have to extract from the earth. We don't have to subdue the earth.
Over-extract, at least. That's
over-extract.
Obviously,
That's true.
We need things to live. But yes, that's there are questions asked at the point you cross the line. Are we taking these things out of greed, or are we taking them out of need? That journey that Mary just described through the first blush of ego and that notion that we are separate. In a lot of cultures, that was moderated, and it was an extremely important thing for those cultures to moderate in young people that experience of the world with stories that would lead them back to the reality of their connectivity.
Tell about the Titans.
Yeah, the Greeks told stories often about the Titans, and the Titans were rough characters, no rules, no laws, no limits, basically. And they were often cast as fairly young men, young male.
In their 20s?
In their 20s and late teens, who were really full of energy and angst. And of course, this is a period of life where that often happens. And it's not just to young men, it's to young women as well. So what they did was to make sure that those young people had mentors. In some of the myths, you'll run across a mentor named Chiron, and Chiron was really important to take the lessons and the wisdom of the natural world and use it to fashion ways that young people could understand how they might be powerful as generative members of their community. How could they take their strength and that energy brewing inside of them and turn it toward the greatest number of people for their community? And this is really the blossoming of what we would call elderhood today. And that was essential. We don't have that kind of intentional storytelling that links us back to the reality of our lives and our biology. We just get the separation event, and then we struggle through life often for decades thinking that's the way the world works.
Well, and to be fair, I think you would agree with this. Women are socialized more into retaining relationship than men are, at least white women and white men. I can't really speak otherwise. And I've never been a man, but I do observe that it's a good bit harder for many white men to think of themselves in terms of relationship because they've been so socialized to be a rugged individual. And Gary and I suggest you check this out too. Has there ever been on the face of this beautiful planet a rugged individual? Nope.
You can't find one.
You probably
anywhere.
Nope.
From the smallest amoeba to the largest elephant. It just doesn't happen.
And so exist. Let's go back to the fundamental instructions or the 8 master lessons that Gary wrote about. In addition to connection and diversity, there is a balance of masculine and feminine. So a balance. In the book, we call it agency and care. Neither of these is better or worse than the other. And the fact is, very clearly, we know this, that no matter whether you identify as male, you identify as female, you identify as non-binary, no matter how you identify, you have this archetypal capacity for care and relationship, which is associated with the archetypal feminine. And you have this capacity for productivity and agency, which is associated with the archetypical masculine. And it's having those in balance that is the real challenge of a culture. And storytelling can help us to keep or get that in balance. The other thing that Gary brought up was elderhood. Elderhood shows up throughout the natural world. Gary was talking about the trees and the way they're connected with those mycorrhizal networks. If any of you are gardeners and you dig into the ground and you see the little white threads, that's the mycorrhiza. Those are the fungi. And how many are in a square?
Well, under every step in a typical forest, there would be quite literally hundreds of miles of those fine
So just
fibers.
Where you stepped with
just
your
where
foot?
I'm standing right now, I would be over hundreds of miles
Wow.
of those fibers, and they're extremely sophisticated in what they let in, what they lead out, their cooperative relationship with the tree. They provide the tree with things, the tree provides them with energy. So it's just extraordinarily sophisticated.
So the grandmother tree, when she knows that, well, first of all, when she sees a tree, whether it's in her species or not, that is young and struggling, she sends out this message to the other trees, whether they're the same species or not, and says, send energy to that little one. So that's been something that's been demonstrated. Another thing that shows up is that as the grandmother gets older and older and is going toward dying, she sends through the mycorrhiza all of her good stuff to everybody in the forest.
Especially the young trees that may be struggling, for instance, when they grow in shade, a lot of species are have a difficult time. And so, as Mary says, as an elder grandmother tree is close to death, a lot of the resources that she holds is sent through the mycorrhizal network. So those trees and others who may need it can benefit from that energy and grow strong.
I told my 88-year-old mother, my 88-year-old mother about that about a month ago. And she said, I really like that story. These are things that can be real guides to us for how it is to be in the world. Another superpower, or one of the 8 master lessons or the instructions, is being able to live, it's resilience, or being able to live in the face of disruption, major disruptions.
Yeah. And let's put some of what Mary said earlier into that disruption idea. The presence of the feminine, the relational, archetypical feminine. Again, no matter what your gender is, you have this capacity to be relational, to activate the feminine archetype, if you will, in your perspective, and give intuition, give free leash basically to your instincts for that relationship. And that took a beating when we started to diminish the importance of the feminine in a lot of mythology, starting 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. And it became much more centered on the agentic male. Not that there's anything wrong with that. The world turns on that as well. But actually diminishing the feminine in quite literal ways as well as figurative ways. Well, then we rolled through that period we talked about with science and subject-object thinking. Nature and the feminine became at best second-class citizens, as did, again, other groups of people. And so what we did by being overly agentic, by denying the feminine, the power of the feminine, was to set ourselves up for a horrible future, some of which is showing itself even now.
And yes, and the crises that we're facing now.
And I also should say that when you go watch wolves in Yellowstone, it's going to more often than not be the female alpha of the alpha and male and female pair that lead the pack. It's going to be the female that makes most of the decisions. In elephants, it's the female that becomes the matriarch and makes most of the decisions and sort of brokers peace among the herd. We now know in orcas that postmenopausal females are the ones that actually perform most of the leadership functions to keep that pod safe. And so I'm saying all this, even though we're talking about disruption, just to let you know that part of what allows you to survive disruption are all of those other things: the interconnectedness, the diversity,
and the
feminine, the elderhood. All of those play a big role. And we are in a time of massive disruption. So these things are all relevant. But there are other things that help us with disruption.
And so another thing, everything that Gary's saying points to another one of the instructions or great master lessons, and that is efficiency. It is simply inefficient to be so out of balance with masculine and feminine. It's simply inefficient to undervalue elders as much as we do. It's inefficient. It's inefficient to sit and interact as we do daily. And by the way, Gary and I haven't, nobody can get 100% out of this reflexive, separate thinking. We've been so deeply socialized in it, and it's so deep in our culture that it's going to take generations, but we can start moving our attention over and over again to how we are in relationship. It's not just the me story. The me story is really inefficient. And it also sets people up for depression and all sorts of things that just don't really serve us individually, and certainly not the relationships that we have. So efficiency is something that shows up like the orcas. I want to say a little modification on the orcas. Yes, the postmenopausal orcas become leaders, but in particular, they become the ones that the young adolescent male orcas hang out with to really learn how to be. Go figure.
Yes,
but that's how it works.
The
and
teachers,
that's the efficiency.
The wise teachers. Yeah. And nature offers a lot of cure for the kind of more stress-filled living that I think Mary was alluding to. Lots of wonderful research from the University of California, University of Illinois, about how ruminating, which actually causes hormonal shifts, upticks in things like cortisol, in increased heart rate and blood pressure, neural changes in your brain, to the point where your system as a human begins to degrade if there is too much of that without a break. Well, this research shows that when people are out in the natural world, those hormonal levels return to normal. Those neural firings start to represent a more normal, calm pattern. So when we say inefficiency, human beings, by being overly anxious or depressed or angry without some sort of moderating influence, and again, we choose nature, do live shorter lives, and they're subject to much more dysfunction and disease in their bodies. So it is an efficiency that nature gives us as far as not allowing us to be quite so obsessed with, our day-to-day worries.
Yes. And so one of the things that we'll just end with is a quick run through how it is that full ecology, and that was our attention. I'm going to hold it up again. This book put legs on the wonderful thinking that Gary put into the 8 Master Lessons. The 8 Master Lessons really contain the stories of what's happening in the natural world that are true for us too. So it's an invitation. But then the question we had was, well, how do you make it real? And so we came up with 4 orientations. They come in order, and we in our Western minds want to put it in some kind of linear time order. You can do that, that's fine. But really, each of them is happening simultaneously. The first one is happening all the time once you get it. So the first orientation, the first step towards reclaiming your nature in nature as nature is to stop. Just stop. Stop every thought. Stop, even if it's just for a split second. Just stop. And in that split second, you can feel it when you feel it. You just stop everything. And while that can be counterintuitive, that stopping is the anchor point that you have always, no matter what. You can start investigating that. Where does that ever go? And is there anything else you can count on more than what you experience with stop? And I'll say a little more about that. Saints and sages and poets and scripture writers, sutras, have been trying for time immemorial to describe this, and they're really good at it when they realize they never can. It can never be described. I can't get accurate words. I can say stop, just stop.
One of the ways that I have tried to get my head around the notion of stop is, again, if you look in the natural world, the stopping is really a kind of present moment awareness. Nature lives in the present moment. So if there's suddenly a invasion of caterpillars on your apple tree, only then, not in advance of those caterpillars arriving, but
not worrying about it.
But when they do show up, sending out pheromones to local wasps, and those wasp populations come in and eat those caterpillars, and on it goes. There isn't our human tendency in most of nature to anticipate things that could go wrong. And so I think in the stopping, we're really just talking about being present and learning to react to what is in front of us. What is the reality in front of us that we must, take into account, as opposed to those things that might go wrong next year or 10 years from now. It isn't that we shouldn't plan, because humans are planners, but so much of this full ecology work begins with, as Mary said, stopping or achieving true present moment awareness.
Well, and this is where we're still in conversation about this, because there's the stop that's about how do I be present so that I can respond to what it is that is around me. And the stop really is, who am I really? What do I want? It's a stop that is fundamental to your internal ecology, to the ecology within. So you just play with that and take it in any way you want. But that's the first orientation that we came up with in here. And part of the reason that we put that very first, because for me, it's fundamental to everything that follows. If you start with stopping, if you just stop, then everything else follows from that. But that's my bias. Then we put it first because one of the things that we're also enculturated to in this culture is to react quickly, to act quickly. We perceive a problem and we act. And we know now from the social sciences that about 95% of the time, those actions are responding to the wrong problem. They're answering the wrong thing. They're wasted energy. And so if we really want to keep heart and be present in these days that are going to demand already so much of us, we stop. And from there, we can form questions that will be more useful and help us to understand what might be the best actions.
And that's
so the second one is to ask.
To ask.
The third one is to act. And then the very last one is to inspire. And the good news is when you've stopped, when you just ask and act from that connected and essential place, you do inspire. You don't even have to try, and you inspire. Plus, you are inspired by other things, and that just adds to what it is that you are seeing and learning and able to provide to the being part of the solution.
So the stopping leads to essentially asking the right question, because just like Mary said, we act in a way that's inappropriate to the real nut of the problem. We also ask questions that we then launch on lots of activity
rabbit holes
that could be the wrong question. And so it's very, very critical that as part of our new way of living in the world, or our very old way of living in the world, actually, that we give honor to that cycle as far as moving forward on what's to come in the decades ahead with climate change and other issues too.
We would really love to hear if anybody wants to speak or ask a question or make a comment. Hi, Lauren. There you are.
Hello, I'm back. Yes. Hello. Yeah. I've been taking a few notes as you have been speaking, and just kind of going back to even the title of your book, Full Ecology. It's all about the connections, and I feel so much of us are disconnected from the natural world. We go to work, either we're working from home, sometimes we might not leave the house, and we're kind of attached to our devices and our screens, and we get in our cars and we drive places, and we just don't really feel that connection, that time to be in nature and ground ourselves and just understand that we are connected. And even just thinking about the definition of what ecology is. It's the study of organisms and their interactions with the environment. So, I mean, that right there is the definition of connections, and understanding that we are organisms and we are a part of this environment. So what we do has impacts on the environment and all of the little bits and pieces that are in there. So from the tiniest microbe, the mycelium of the mushrooms, all the way up to, the biggest organisms, the giant sequoias and the blue whales. Like, I'm trying to think of all the largest organisms I can right now. And So just having that connection between us and the environment. And we do forget about that. And when it comes to something like climate change, it does get very overwhelming because you think, what can I do as one person? But it's just to go back to remembering that we are connected to the world and to the environment. So even if you're one person doing one thing, it is still having an impact out there. So that, not to get too bogged down to like heavy in it all, and you just feel frustrated, like we can't do anything. It's just reminding all of us that we are connected to the environment and to the world. So yeah, just thinking about the title of the book, Full Ecology. We are a part of it. So, and it's not just the science part of it, it's also psychologically, as you said. So many benefits to being in nature. So many studies showing the impacts that it has on kids who have ADHD, and just being outside, and their sensory is just so much improved, and their attention span is improved. And yeah, I mean, that's true for us too. I mean, like anyone at all, going outside, your attention span improves and you can focus more. So, how many times you're like, I need a break, and you go outside and you take a walk and you refocus. So yeah.
There's an old environmental slogan, which I think may still be floating around a bit, to think globally and act locally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is the connection. This is the fullness of ecology. You do what you do and make the difference you can make. Use your superpowers as best you can. And, I do want to be clear that if you look at social media and if you work from home and you don't go outside, you can't escape. You should check this out too. You can't escape being the natural world anyway. You're the natural world inside, and you're surrounded by things that come from the natural world. So you can continue to find reminders in the relationships that are right there. The thing about nature is that whether you believe it or not, it's there for you all the time. And you are that.
It's been frustrating, I think, for both of us at times to hear sometimes environmentalists say, well, it doesn't really matter if you conserve electricity or recycle.
Right.
First of all, oceans are made of many individual drops, so it does matter. But beyond that, those actions are a touchstone to the very kind of grounding of interconnectivity that we're talking about. Every time you do those little things, you have an opportunity to acknowledge. That becomes part of your storytelling system about who you are and how you are in the world. And, I was thinking earlier, Elaine Scarry at Harvard University talks about the power of the beauty of nature. And she says the way it plays out and the way it's so significant to humans is beauty draws you in and moves you to the side of the stage. And far from being upset about being on the side of the stage and no longer the star of the Me movie, you're actually happy to be on the side of the stage and watching and being a part of this grand unfolding of this lovely system that is different in every minute. And so just the smallest 10 or 15 minutes in the natural world can have a big effect, which will have a physiological effect as well, but it will also keep you in touch, just like your daily acts of recycling or writing letters or whatever you're doing on behalf of the environment. That keeps you in touch and keeps the candle lit inside you, and through inspiration, as Mary said, the candle lit in other people as well.
Mm-hmm. And, if you live near communities that have been, over time, that have been really hurt by climate change catastrophes, do what you can to go there and to just shop for your groceries there. I want people to go to Gardner, Montana and shop for their groceries for the week. It's a long drive, but man, they need that kind of help. So I thought I saw another face.
Yes, there is another face. So Kathy has a question for us, and let's see if we can, is she going to come back here? Oh, we might have lost her camera, but I believe we still have audio. So Kathy, if you have a question for us. Oh, maybe not. I saw her. She joined.
Yeah.
vanished.
Just vanished.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's been wonderful to be here with you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And
thank you for the work of Mohonk and how you all support it.
You talk about inspiring.
Yeah.
You've got that in spades, and all across all these miles, we're taking great heart and inspiration from your work. So thank you.
Yeah. Our motto is saving the land for life, and that's what we aim to do. And of course, climate change is big on our minds, and how we can continue to save our land here for future generations. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we are planning on doing something on the topic of climate solutions. So this kind of goes right along with what we're talking about. And
Great.
just what can we do? It's a big, heavy topic, and we're working on something for this fall. So here in the Hudson Valley, we have Climate Solutions Week. So that's in September. Fantastic. So we're making plans for an event in September during that week.
Wonderful. And one last thing I'd like to say is, for all the folks who may attend that event, see if you can notice if a thought about, well, will this really solve the problem? Will this be the solution? And when will it happen if it does? Again, how do you want to live your life, for starters? Mm-hmm. And what do you want to be aligned with as far as the stories you tell and the communities that you exist in? And these events are part of that, which therefore give a foundation for these solutions. We don't know when the solutions are all going to be in hand, or if even the solutions are going to be in hand, but it doesn't really change what we wake up to and how we have an opportunity to live our lives as each day unfolds.
Yeah, like Gary's saying, he and I, we can't know. We can't tell you what's going to happen with climate change. We can't tell you what's going to happen with the human race. We don't know. We see signs it could go really bad. We also know that we're fundamentally oriented towards cooperation and kindness. The question to each of us is, how do we wish to live our lives? How do we want to be in relationship?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. And most importantly, littlest actions have the biggest waves. And one of them is definitely getting out and vote. Today, it was actually an election day here in New York. So people did go to the polls today. So I'm hoping that they exercise their right to vote and they use their voice in that way. So I think Kathy might be here again. Or not. No.
Right.
Oh, well, hopefully.
Well, thank you so much.
Yes. And if anyone does have questions for you, they can reach out to you through your website, right? Fullyecology.com.
Yes, fullyecology.com. Mm-hmm. And we're also easily can be accessed with connect@fullyecology.com.
Great. Yes. And I'll send that information out to everyone as well. So thank you so much for your time this evening. This was really wonderful.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye for now.
Bye for now.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.